Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ars Electronica Garden Bologna. I guess you have seen the four artworks that we presented here for the Data Tour d'Italie. This is the name of the project, of the garden, and the garden hosted some artists who work with scientific research centers dealing with environmental data. So we crossed all Italy from Alps and working. And there was an artist working on data on glaciers, and then Marco Barotti worked on the data connected to the pollution in Pianura Padana with moss. And I take this opportunity to say that we are here at Resilienze Festival. During Ars Electronica, there is also another festival here in Bologna for the people who are streaming. So if for people who are around, I really suggest also to come at Resilienze Festival till tomorrow to see all the other artworks that Marco Barotti has presented and is presenting in these days at Le Serre dei Giardini Margherita. And then two other works, one working on microplastics in Fano, and the other one on the data connected to the erosion of the mountains through the wind in Cagliari. Data Tour d'Italie is not just a project with these four artworks and the panel that we are in here today, but it's also a network of artists and research centers in Italy working on environment. Now we are here to go in depth on some issues connecting to data, and I'm delighted to present you our three guests that are with us today. Connected with us, there's Luca Martinelli. Luca is working as a community relations specialist for Wikimedia Foundation, and he is also the administrator of Italian Wikipedia and Wikidata. Thank you, Luca, for being with us today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
And then we've got Federica Fragapane. She's one of the most known and influential Italian visual and information designer. She works for Google, for Corriere della Sera, for Wired. And thank you, Federica, for being here.
Thank you, and hi all, everyone.
And last but not least, we've got Valentina Tanni with us. She's one of the Italian finest critics and curator on digital art and digital media, and professor at Politecnico di Milano and NABA Academy. Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this talk. Mainly what we are working today, what we are discussing today is how data can help us understanding environmental issues. And we know that data are not just good or bad, they are. But for letting the people understanding the data, we have to present them in some ways, and there are many ways for presenting data. There are artworks, there are scientific papers, chatbots, and they help us in understanding the complex ecosystem we live in. We have this powerful tool, and the way of present them is designed for different kind of audiences and different purposes to show possible multiverses, but most of the times, and especially in this talk, for producing civic engagement and helping the scientific community to go forth on their research. So we are here. I would start with Luca Martinelli, and I will start talking about Wikidata, because we know that Wikimedia, as the foundation, and we all know Wikimedia, aims to develop and maintain open content free of charge, and to foster political advocacy for our democracy, and data are very important for that. So the Wikidata project is a project that is connected to open source data, and we would like to know what it is specifically from Luca, how it works, and how people can contribute and use this data for amplifying the knowledge about our environment and our ecosystem.
Oh, I even thought I would start first, but okay. So let's start with defining Wikidata as one of the Wikimedia projects. We all know Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia that started in 2001. This year, it's our 20th year of community work and voluntary work. Wikidata started in October 2012, and it's basically a database. It's an open database, which is free at its very core. It's basically a multilingual database. It's a multilingual project. What it means that we all use all our languages. So we can speak in English, in French, in Italian, in Russian, in Vietnamese. Of course, English is the main language of our project for discussing between communities. But it's also a multilingual project because all the data that Wikidata stores are actually automatically translated into other languages. This means that, well, not all of the data, of course, but the most important data are automatically corrected into other languages. Also, they are machine readable, which is another thing that back in 2012 wasn't that, it wasn't so easy to find, sorry. It wasn't something that, I mean, we were starting thinking about the 5-star data, the linked open data. It was still a very techy stuff. It was still a very techy thing to discuss about. Now we're talking about linked open data, actually, as a way to improve our ecosystem, as a way to improve our societies, and so on. And actually, Wikidata started as a way to look at our own knowledge created from 2001 to 2012. So we started taking a look at all our articles, all across the various Wikipedias, and then all across the other projects that we have, in order to understand what we worked on until that moment and where we should focus next. Then, after a couple of months, it started like that. We started looking outside our perimeter. And so we started to connect with libraries and then museums and then catalogs from state-sponsored archives or private archives and so on. And then again in 2016, 2017, we went further beyond, starting to work on people, starting to work with people who actually wanted to make something with this data. So trying to transform our data into something that can be reused outside also of our perimeter, of our what we call the Wikimedia ecosystem in a way, or the Wikidata, pardon, the Wikimedia ecosystem, or system, or community, or family, of movement, or whatever. I mean, we have many ways to describe ourselves. So in a way, it was finally the possibility for us to to finally give back something, not just to Google, who actually tapped in our data immediately, because they immediately got the importance of our data. But it was possible also for other people to look at our data and take a look at society as it is described by the sources, as it is described by the volunteers. In a way, in the last years, in our movement, as probably it's already written in my biography on the website, I've been a member of this community since 2006. So it's 15 years I'm in the Wikimedia community. And that means that in the last years, I had the opportunity, I had the privilege of meeting with many more Wikipedians at our usual conferences and meetups all around the world. And many of them are coming from what we call the global south. It means the non-Western world. And in a way, this is not, something that I say out of, it's not a buzzword. I'm not saying this. It's funny or it's hip to say so. It is actually true. They actually brought me to think that many parts of our history are not told, that there are many experiences of our collective knowledge, world knowledge, that are simply not known, and they are finally finding a stage in order to be told, and they are finally finding a space in which people can actually uh, not just fight the current narrative, but implement a new narrative or correct sometimes the new narrative, and just make new things emerge. In this case, Wikidata was really important because it made us aware of what we were lacking in the first place. Um, giving a more concrete example, in Italy, we run every year. We run the Wiki Loves Monuments photo contest, which is the world's biggest photo contest. It started in 2010 in the Netherlands, and then it scattered all over the world, and it's now in more than 90 countries. Of course, Italy included. One of the things that this action brought us was actually to look at the cultural heritage that we don't have uh, still represented in Wikidata. It was also a way to contact the municipalities, to contact people out there and say, please tell us more about your territory. Tell us more about what you have in order for us to import your data and in order for us to make it more available. In this way, Wikidata, it's a platform that everybody can use. It's free. It's freely reusable. All our data is available. It's freely downloadable for everyone. Everybody can actually build application on top of our data, can query our data, can work on our data, and can edit if they want our data. Uh, I don't know if it's right. I'll probably keep it for later because I have a couple of more examples to show. But probably this will be for the next round. But as for now, um, um, it's basically the possibility. You just have the possibility by subscribing to our projects to enter our world and actually correct and add and modify our data, and or if you want just to reuse it, you don't even have to subscribe to our projects. You just have to to collect freely our data and build your own application. Many of the existing application on Wikidata actually are made by Wikipedians who thought that actually Wikidata it's a good project, it's a wonderful project, but it's just a starting point for people to actually start to develop their own narrative and starting to develop their own way of describing the world. So I hope this can work as a very confused and a very patchy description of Wikidata. Uh, but yeah, I want to conclude my first answer as this is the best project ever because it started as a free project. It started from the Wikipedia data. So from all the data that we collected in the 12 years that we didn't have Wikidata. It started as a Wikipedia project. It didn't have any idea of becoming what is becoming now, a hub of free data, freely reusable data, open data, and data that actually was from the start released under public domain. Well, under Creative Commons 0, which is not public domain, but it's very close to public domain. And we did it because originally the project was started in in Germany. I was saying Deutschland because of Wikimedia Deutschland, which is the German chapter, the German association that runs all the initiatives in Germany. And they started the project, and we had to deal with the EU directive on databases. And we said, since there's the risk for us to be copyrighted, since there is a risk for our data to be copyrighted without our consent, we release it in the open immediately. So we decided politically to say, whoever wants to reuse this data, they can. They can do it because it's CC0, because all our pages, except the data, are CC by SA, so attribution share alike as Wikipedia, it's the same Creative Commons license as Wikipedia, and then the very engine is actually GNU GPL. So even the software which Wikidata is based upon is free. This is a political statement about what we wanted to do. We didn't know what to do in a way. We wanted to collect the sum of all world's data and to expand on that. But we didn't have any objective in mind, but we had clearly how to do it in an open way and with free open software. That was our commitment, and we still have this commitment for now. I hope this is it's okay as a description, or if there is anything that I have to make more clear, and I also hope that my rant was actually heard, and that there was no problem, no connection problem.
Yeah, no, we heard everything. Thank you, Luca, and thank you for reminding us that the fact that there are a lot of people, and we always talk about data as the new oil and data as a new extractive thing that we can make a lot of money of, and you remind us that it's not the only option, that data can be something very different, and data can be common good, and even if you don't see at the beginning like the profit of doing this data, doesn't matter really. It's the important thing that we share this knowledge, and you clearly show us this other possible option outside the rhetoric of saying that we have to earn, and this is something that we have to earn from. So, and by the way, I really like your background. So let's.
This is not my living room, right? It's just a way to conceal the mess that I have at my back.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we'll come back to you later with the second question. And I would now go and talk to Federica a bit. And Federica says that that her job is to collect, interpret, and show data every day. And this is why we wanted to talk about the way in which she does that. But especially in the last period, of course, we talk a lot. Like a lot of people talk about data, and data has a big hype. So what do you think we are experiencing this great interest, or also on data visualization nowadays? And I would like you to, since you have done that for a long time, to talk about the process of your collection, interpretation, and release and showing of your data.
Sure. So, can you hear me?
I can.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So the main goal is communicating. I mean, I'm a communication designer. I use data, I visualize data to communicate stories and to help the comprehension of complex realities and complex issues and topics. And can I have my slides so I can show them? And I think that there is a great interest in data visualization, because data visualization is actually a very strong tool to explore and allows the comprehension of topics and issues. And I mean, I'm used to work with numbers every day, but in the last years, we have experienced how data can affect our everyday life, unfortunately. And this is why it's so important to communicate them properly and to use them properly. And I want to show you the process behind some of my projects to share with you what is the work behind a data visualization piece. And first of all, a super quick introduction. I'm an independent designer, and I work as a freelancer, and I collaborate with Google, United Nations, Corriere della Sera. And I'm also co-author of 2 books, and it's the next slide. Okay. A children book published by National Geographic Kids and White Star, and an atlas that uses the potential of data visualization and cartography to talk about water-related topics. And next slide. And in general, my projects can be very different from each other in terms of complexity, in terms of needs and usage context. But from my point of view, next slide, all my projects are characterized by the interest on the connection that they can create with the people they talk to, and I'm particularly interested in studying such connection and in studying how visual elements, visual representations can help me in having an impact on it. And I want to show you an example, a practical example. As I was mentioning, I collaborate with Corriere della Sera, more specifically with La Lettura. And La Lettura is a cultural supplement, it's a printed cultural supplement of Corriere della Sera. And I design visualizations for visual data, and visual data is a data visualization column. And I work on the analysis and communication of cultural, social, and environmental topics. And there are always 2 aspects about this kind of collaboration that I have to mention. And the first one is related to the usage context. I mentioned the usage context before. So La Lettura is a printed cultural supplement published during the weekends. And I often see the photographs shared by La Lettura's readers. And these are the most common ones. So La Lettura next to a cup of coffee or a brioche or a tea, in a context that suggests as the reading act is part of a lazy and relaxing Sunday morning. And knowing the context allows me to have a specific approach to this kind of projects. I know that I can work on pieces that need more time to be read because readers have time to do that. And then the second aspect is the fact for this kind of project, I'm asked to visual experiment while providing meaningful contents. So the intersection of these 2 requests allows me to work on pieces that have, of course, an informative purpose, but they are also next to the data art field. And the goal is always to engage the readers, to invite them in reading my pieces and therefore in reading the contents. And I want to show you, this is the process that usually characterizes this kind of projects. So selection of topics and sources, data analysis, of course, and definition of a specific and custom visual model. And I usually also propose the topics to be visualized. This is something that I really love doing. And as data visualization designers, in my case, I am a person who's talking to other people. And so for me, it's very important always keeping in mind my readers and always trying to put myself in my potential reader's shoes. First of all, asking myself what would interest me as reader, and then of course what would be interesting for someone else. And even if I won't ever have a complete answer, clearly, I think that this approach is an effective starting point for finding interesting contents to deal with. And in general, it's very important to always keep in mind the readers, keep in mind the main goal that is communicating to them. And next slide. Okay, I want to show you a practical example because it's the best way to talk about this kind of job. So a few years ago, I worked on a data set on CO2 emissions for a set of countries. And I wanted to visualize this annual data, 9 years of CO2 emissions for a selection of countries. And an important step for me especially when I work on, let's say, experimental projects, is the visual inspiration phase. So I spend a lot of time looking for visual inspiration, not only when I have to start a new project, but basically every day, because I really like to fill my eyes and my mind with elements that then I can reuse for my visualization. And in that case, at that time I had found this image, and I liked it very much because I thought it was beautiful, visually beautiful, but I also found it slightly creepy, and I like because of the textures and the shapes, and I like the idea of trying to use this combination of feelings. Again, always thinking about the impact that this could have on the potential readers. And so when I work on this kind of projects, the first step is always the data analysis phase. So I study the data, I filter them, I try to see what could be the best way to give them a shape. Even if it's never just one solution, there are many ways in which we can visualize data. And then the inspiration phase helps me in finding new visual structures and visual elements. So I want to show you the rules now that I defined and I decided for all my countries and that I apply to all my countries. Because this is what I do. I define a set of rules and I apply them to all the elements that I have. In this case, I decided to visualize or set a radial lines for each country. Each line is a year. And to visualize the CO2 emission data through this petal, whose length represents the CO2 emitted by year. And I visualize all this data for all the countries that I had. And then after having worked on the actual visualization of all the data, I worked a lot in detail on the look and feel and on the textures and the shades because I really wanted to work on that aspect, inspired by that image and also by the feelings coming from it. Are there any issues with the microphone? No.
I think, can we do anything about that?
Okay.
What about that speaker there? Is that possible that is that speaker provoking the...
Okay.
Can you try? Puoi provare questo?
Is it better? Yes, I think it is. Yeah, okay. Okay, so, and when I work on this kind of projects, I always work on different layers of information to give the readers the possibility of studying the topic I'm talking about with different deepnesses of analysis. And in this case, the first layer was the emission information. And then the second one, I worked on a second one that is represented by the color. I used two colors to represent the change in the emissions over the previous year. Red indicates increased emissions and blue decreased ones. So in this case, it's not another layer of it's not another data added to the visualization, but it's a way to help the readers in looking at the data, in this case, in looking at changes over time. And then finally added another one, that is, in this case, another data that I thought it was interesting if compared to the main one, the renewable energy consumption as percentage of the total energy consumption by country. And I represented this data as two sized circles, one for 1992 and one for 2012. And this is the final piece, the next slide. It will appear. Okay, so while we are waiting for the next slides, these are the rules that I had decided to apply to all the countries that I have selected. And then this is the final visualization in which I applied all my rules to all the countries that I had selected. And as you can see, there are elements that can quickly be seen, such as the size of certain countries, for instance, or the predominance of a certain color. And keeping this aspect, this option, is important. But there are also elements that need time to be read in a kind of slow reading connection between the piece and the visualization. And this is an aspect that is related to the usage context, as I was mentioning. It's very important to know how my visualizations are going to be used and how people are going to read them. And when I work on this kind of projects, I really think about them as the visual equivalent of long articles. And I write with visual letters, and in some cases I also experiment on new visual alphabets. And for this reason, it's extremely important to provide the readers with all the tools to use such alphabets. And this is why, for me, it's very important to create a legend that clearly explains how to read them and how to use them. And it's very important to combine properly words and visual elements. I think that a misconception about this field is thinking that a good infographic doesn't need text to be properly understood. I think this is not true. It really depends, but in general, we are not data literate. That means we don't learn how to read graphics in school. We learn how to read words, how to read text, but this is not something that it's not a field we are used to. And so this is why I think that even for the simplest graphics, it's important to properly combine very quick and short explanations to the visual representations. Even more important for mine that are particularly complex and experimental. And then one last thing, what is very important, it's also to test them. And my parents are my favorite testers because they are not data visualization experts, and therefore they represent the majority of my potential readers. And this moment, this step in my design process, testing them and asking for feedback is an essential one, is a very important one. So just to conclude this first answer, for instance, some of these visualizations need time to be read, but I don't think this is a problem at all. I think that there are topics that when the usage context allows it, deserve to be read with taking the proper time to do it. And I think that data visualization is really can be like an article, and combining a very good data visualization with a very good article can be a good way to communicate topics and to use numbers to help readers, to help people in comprehend complex realities and complex topics. And that's it.
Thank you, Federica. I find your visualization really amazing. I already knew them, but the interesting thing is the special way and pioneering way that you invented, I would say, because you had to create your own grammar since the beginning, because like it's a new thing what you're doing, and I find this very inspiring also for like in the intersection between art and information, which is like the new way in which we should experience things which are not just from one side of the border of the river, let's say, because the ecosystem is very complex and we need really to dive into new pioneering way of expressing things, and this is a very good start. So yeah, thanks for this introduction to your work. I would go to Valentina. And Valentina is
work. Is it? Yeah, is it work? Yes.
Valentina has been working in the last 20 years. We were talking like 1 hour ago, 20 years ago, starting working on digital art, and when nobody in Italy used to do it, even now actually, there are just few people still working as a critic on digital art. So I would like to ask you, for your huge experience now, if you see some trends in the way in which artists are approaching data, because of course there are different ways of approaching them, and what you see, if you see if there's now a need of widening with artificial intelligence, new digital tools, the way of cooperation of artists, because maybe they cannot just work by themselves because the tools and the softwares are even complex. So what do you see now in this landscape of the art?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to thank you again for inviting me here. And I will start by saying that artists approach the world of data in many different ways. So in many different and also personal ways sometimes. Sometimes they use data just as a raw material, and so they take data and transform data into something else. So we can see that also in some of the installation here. They take the data and transform data into sound, into movement, into shapes, into images, and so on. That's one way they use it. But also in some cases, and these are the cases that interest me the most, and I will show you later some examples. In other cases, data is just a point of departure of the research, and because it's a point of departure for building a more critical reflection on digital information in general, on how we retrieve data, collect data, and catalog data, and so on. So this is, for a lot of artists, data is just the starting point of a wider research about the relationship that we as humans have with technology. And also, they start from data and then they go on analyzing the infrastructure that supports data, and also more in general the political and the social forces that shape technology and that shape the way we use technology, the way we talk about technology, and the way technology basically influences all aspects of our lives. So these are I think the two main approaches that we see in the world of contemporary art, connecting the world of contemporary art with data. Another important aspect I would highlight is the fact that if we look back at the history of the relationship between art and technology, it's very clear that this critical attitude, this way that they have of questioning technology, not just using technology, but questioning every decision that we as society take on technology. This critical attitude has been carried on by artists, I mean, since the beginning of the history of the relationship between art and technology. I mean, we can start observing this kind of attitude since the end of the 60s and the 70s and so on. This critical attitude is, I think, an invaluable tool for society to understand technology better, and most of all to understand the implication of technology, their potentials, but also their risks and their possible disadvantages. So the side effects of technology, because the side effects of technologies are the things that sometimes are not immediately visible when a new technology arrives on the market, but are the ones that are most dangerous in a way, the ones that are most that we have to pay most attention to, and so artists do this mainly by misusing technology. This is a kind of attitude that we see recurring in the history of the relationship between art and technology. This idea of taking a technology and using it the wrong way, of just not looking at the instructions at all and trying to make this technology do things that were not even in the design, in the first design of the technology. This kind of disrespect for technology, a kind of course, a creative disrespect of technology, is something that we really need as a society to counterbalance a sort of. I mean, sometimes as a society we tend to put too much faith in progress, meaning interpreting the idea of progress simply as more technologies and more and faster technologies and so on. So just in terms of progressing in the field. So we need, I think, that critical approach, that critical attitude to counterbalance this idea and have a more critical ideas, to be more aware of all the possible implications of the use of a technology. I would like to quote an American media theorist. His name was Neil Postman. I don't know if you know him, and he once famously said, he wrote a sentence that I find very I mean, very to the point. It goes straight to the point, and makes us reflect a lot on this particular issue. He once famously said, of course, paraphrasing the old saying, "To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail." We all know this saying, and he, paraphrasing this phrase, he wrote, "To a person with a computer, everything looks like data." And by this, with this expression, what he meant to say is that embedded in every technologies, there are ideas. There are sometimes very powerful ideas. And these ideas are often, as I said a minute ago, sometimes are hidden. We don't see them immediately. But even though they have enormous side effects, they have enormous practical consequences on society. And this is why we need to reflect on these ideas that come embedded inside the technology, especially because most of the technology we use today is produced by big corporations that have different agendas, and so some ideas, some concepts, some philosophies comes embedded into the technology that we use. So we have to know a lot of projects made by artists are focused on this idea of making people aware of the fact that technology is not neutral, and that every interface is designed with some ideas in mind and with some goals in mind, and that computers were not born with that kind of interface. The interface could be completely different, and the interface for example, of the software we use every day. For example, the software, the interface of social networks could be completely different, and we know, because we have experienced it, how much that kind of interface influences the way we use that particular software. So this is this critical attitude towards technology is a sort of fil rouge that we see in most of new media art today. What else? Oh, for the second part of the question about expertise. So the answer, again, is complex, because we see that some artists possess actually the knowledge and the skills to manage data themselves, so they don't need, they work by themselves, and they write software, they collect data, and so on. But sometimes we also see that artists have no problems at all cooperating with data scientists, with data visualization artists, with engineers, and all sorts of professional figures in technology. Because collaboration and teamwork is widespread in the world of art from many years now, and especially in the world of new media art, teamwork has always been central and very normal. So I think we can find both situations. So artists working with data themselves, and also trying to find maybe alternative ways to manage data, but also we find a lot of artists that are completely open to cooperation and collaboration with the scientists. So we find both situations. Personally, I really don't like the definition data artist that I sometimes read, because I think that it doesn't really say much about the work that artists are doing on data, and also it doesn't say much about the different approaches to data, and also it's a little bit restrictive. Maybe it's a little bit too narrow to contain all the complexity of the work that artists are doing. And I think that new media art is already a very debatable tag, a very debatable category, because these days most artists are using technologies in one way or another, even if of course some of them are more focused on technologies, but technologies is so widespread and is so profoundly embedded in our lives that I don't know if it makes sense to divide arts with this so narrow and so closed categories. So I think that maybe we don't need any more categories to apply. Just talk about art in general. I prefer that. And yeah, maybe I can show you some examples in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. What strikes me is that you have talked about artists and you never talked about beauty, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because we are changing the paradigm of what art means probably in this.
Totally.
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes beauty is involved. I mean, sometimes aesthetic is important. I mean, it's not just conceptual, but sometimes the visual aspect, it's probably not the main thing.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, sometimes it's relevant, but it's not in the. I mean, we cannot refer to the traditional concept of beauty.
Of course.
Maybe sometimes to a research about the form, that it's not just about beauty, but about sometimes, and we will see that in the example. Sometimes artists are much more interested in building a sense of empathy. That it's a totally different thing.
We have to rediscuss a lot in the next years what artists will do, and also what in this teams that you were talking to artists can do. So let's go back to Luca. I would like to ask you if, as Wikimedia, you are collecting any information and checking information about people who use and contribute in terms, let's say, data and Wikimedia in general, in terms of gender, profession, age, to understand what's going on that side. If there are some categories that we can make, and let us know more about more knowledge about the use of Wikimedia and the role of Wikimedia in contributing to this political advocacy in terms of sustainable development on climate change, which is the topic of this data tour d'Italie that we talked to in the last 4 artworks that we have seen.
First of all, I have to unmute myself, which I usually forget to do also in my other online meetings. Work meeting. So first of all, thank you very much not asking me anything about beauty too, because as you might probably have seen from visiting Wikipedia and all our projects, design is the very last thing that we actually care about, and we put our focus on, because we're mostly focused on content. We're still a sociologist actually said that our community is still in the mid of the 2000s of the noughties, because it was like we're a pre-Facebook community. I took that as a compliment in a way. That also allows me to, this joke actually allows me to answer your first question. We do not register any data about us. Never actually happened. In order to log into Wikidata, to Wikidata, but to Wikipedia, to any of our projects, you just have to provide a username which is not used still by anybody else in the world, a password, and that's it. No real name is required. There is no necessity for you to use your real name as a username. I strongly suggest to provide an email, because I mean, if you lose your password, that's the only way you can recollect it. Otherwise, you have to log in again. You have to create a new account on the project. Other than that, we actually don't have any. I mean, I went on in these last 15 years, probably talking probably by but by any means, not knowing the real name of many Wikipedians. I had to do many of the old Wikipedias back in 2006, 2007. that actually left after a couple of years on the project, I never met them in real life. Most of the Wikipedians, of course, I did, and we know each other by name. We know each other by nickname. So we frequently mix the use of the two, but we usually don't ask too much about ourselves, and we don't reveal too much of ourselves, except we want to, except there is some reason to do so, or because you get more acquainted to other people. As I was saying, I'm still in contact with lots of Wikipedians who left, and I've never discovered their names, and I'm not interested in doing. I'm not really interested in doing so. I mean, if they wanted to, they would have told me. That's the point. I really don't have any need about that. Any reason to force them to reveal me anything. That doesn't mean that we don't that Wikimedia Foundation, which is actually the non-profit foundation with its own headquarters in the United States. That doesn't mean that the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't do some surveys every now and then in order to collect feedback and to collect data to foster the projects, to apply new things or new tools and stuff like that. But since I carried out some of those surveys for Wikimedia Foundation, I know that I have to put all the personal data section is to be not mandatory. It's actually something that if users wants to compile, it's okay. If they want to compile it, it's okay. Otherwise, you just can skip it. There is a lot of backlash actually if we use Google as a Google survey for conducting our service. If we do so, because many people, some people are, there are open alternatives. Why don't we use them? Because I don't trust Google in giving any data, even if we are collecting it for our own benefit. So that's our take on privacy. That also is one of the this is actually one of the pillars of our movement. We are actually very interested in keeping privacy, because data actually, yeah, on one hand, data is something beautiful that should be free, that should be open, that should be linked, that should be freely usable. But when it comes to knowledge, not to personal beings, which is kind of a problem sometimes, because we have to deal with many problems with privacy. But on the other hand, I mean, when you're collecting data, we don't care about who is giving that data. We care about the source of the data that particular user is bringing to the discussion. That was back in the old days, and this is still a pillar for us. This is not just us. We are amateurs. Because in the original sense of the term, we love to collect knowledge. We love to share knowledge, and that's about it. We do it because we love it, or because we love our municipality, our city, or because we love something. We love a subject. We love I don't know, a footballer, an actor, or a particular historical figure. That's why we do it, and we don't question it. We don't question the love. We don't question the reason why. The reasons why. We question maybe the sources you use in order to collect that knowledge. That also, I mean, we always bring the focus elsewhere, since in respect on what social medias and usually the discussion about privacy, it's always all about, because we solved that at the very first day. We don't collect data. We are not interested in data. if you wanna participate to our surveys and explicit your data, you're free to do so, but it's never mandatory. That's something that I still uphold as one of my core values in this. This is actually, in order to answer your other question, this is actually, so I'll give up my two examples that I wanted to show here. Maybe we can, I can send it to you, and you can put it in the suggested link. About climate change, about environmental challenges, and you know, all these matters. We have some we have some projects which are still about collecting data in order to understand what we have and what is out there. We have initiatives, photo contests, and things like things like in order to still describe what the situation is about. There is still probably there is no drive inside the community at the moment to actually go beyond that. So I don't have any knowledge of users actually creating a project for sustainable environment, for sustainable goals or something like that. But in a way, I'll answer you in the most Wikipedian fashion I know. Why don't you do it yourself? Which, in a way, it's not. Sometimes we say it more rudely. In a way, it means we didn't think about it, but since you thought about it, can we help you in building that tool? Can we help you in how can we guide you in getting what you want? I mean, we can provide you with data, we can provide you with Wikipedia pages, we can provide you with images, we can provide you with connection to all the databases in order to describe and collect this data and try to do something that actually can make a difference in your neighborhood or in your country, that can actually be a drive for change. I mean, in this regard, Wikimedia Foundation doesn't take a stand explicitly. I mean, of course, as a community, we share. I mean, we are human beings, and so we share the fight for sustainable goals. We fight the. We do believe there is a climate emergency out there, because I mean, the common consensus in the scientific realm is that there is a human-driven climate change. I mean, this is the major consensus. So we actually think this is the major theory, the major consensus about this. And of course, we take care of this. There is an eco-sustainability initiative inside our movement, which is actually trying to make our in real life meetings more connected. So allowing people who cannot take a plane to the venue or cannot move to the venue to actually attend from remote. Of course, this initiative, I don't know why in the last 18 months has has had is boost its boost, because everybody is in remote. So possibly this was an idea that we actually started to apply in 2019. So, but politically speaking, we prefer to be those who empower other people to do things. In a way, I'm trying to collect also idea I've heard during the other while the other speakers were doing their intervention. I think probably it's always the same with data. So you start from what reality is, and then you build on this data, and you try to identify, the wrong way to describe the situation, or another way, as I like to say, another way to describe reality. Probably something more, something that nobody thought of, or something that you care about, because that's the point. As a movement, we are very interested in many things, in many fights, and so everything that actually brings knowledge, that brings things to the attention of the wider audience, to us is okay. Unfortunately, since we are meddling with so many things contemporarily, usually we say, so yeah, but if you go first, it would be better because you have a better drive. You know what you want to do. We can help you on a technical level, or we can give you some more some ideas, or constructive criticism. But we're also focused on our thing, so it's kind of, well, welcome to the family. Just try very hard to make your thing work, and then we can build on that. So that's our kind of approach. But still, many Wikipedians, as I said, are actually very. I mean, one of my colleagues at the foundation actually wants to start an NGO in Sweden against corruption. And we all, because he said in Sweden, corruption is actually a problem. And actually, he said that to a French, two Italians, a Ghanaian, and a Nigerian, I think. Yeah. So people from around the world that looks up to Sweden as a country that actually has a better take on corruption than our own country does. But still, that also tells you how world can be different, and how sometimes the world we tell us, the world we talk about sometimes can be different, or can be differently recounted from other people. So I mean, not collecting data about our users sometimes, it's actually a limitation. Okay, because it would be nice for us to know if there are more women, in order to know if actually our efforts to bring women and other people and non-binary people inside our community actually works. Because we always talk about gender gap or knowledge gap, or we are very aware of our gaps in our community, but still we kind of lack the way of describing them in regard to ourselves. This is actually a problem for privacy, but it's also a problem also for this, for describing reality, and then moving on to actually what we want, what we can do as a movement. We push for openness, we push for privacy, we push for knowledge, we push for uh, common understanding. We push for making the knowledge infrastructure free for everyone. Because, I mean, letting artists and scientists talk, it's actually also a matter of, it's not just a right of expression, it's also the right of copy information. It's also about the right of freely share the information that an artist and a scientist have, in order to make something more different, something new, something better, something that can actually be edited, and in a way, um, uh, can be something that can be ameliorated by somebody. That's something that actually we care mostly about.
Uh,
So, yeah.
yeah, I I think this, I will take your idea of inviting some artists to use Wikidata. I really love this love and data, family and data. This is what you expect. What I will come, what I bring back home is this close relationship and emotional relationship with data. And I really take you on board that you will be able to support some artists in working or to give some technical advice because it's very important. As I was saying with Valentina, not all the artists can use some tools, but there are a lot of artists interested in using them. So I will take, I don't know if like I asked you the question, so when you said, I want you to work on climate change and data with our data, I just take this word and I will come back to you soon with some artists working on that. So thank you, Luca.
I'll be waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, we will be waiting.
Yeah.
There are many people here that might be interested in that.
All right, thanks. Federica. Let's come back, and as we were saying, Data Tour d'Italie is a project on artists working on data for better understanding climate change. But working with data is not always easy, and data are a strange object, and they can be very subjective also. So I wanted to talk with you, since you use a lot and manipulate them a lot, and you not manipulate, but use them and interpret them a lot. Can data lie? And how can data be objective or subjective? What's the relationship between truth and data?
Thank you. Sure, data can lie, data visualization can lie, because data objectivity is not an intrinsic characteristic of data and of data and on contents. They are not neutral creatures, so they can use to allow the comprehension of topics, but they can also use in a misleading way, more or less consciously. And I think that what is important is always taken into consideration and always stress, from my point of view as designer, the human intervention behind my job, but also behind the data collection process, because also the data that I download online, that I find, the one that I free, there is always a human intervention behind them. And I think it is always very important, especially now that we see how data can impact our life, to stress the fact that data are not just neutral objects, but that there is always a human intervention behind them. And they can also be incomplete, but they can be helpful anyway, despite being incomplete. I want to show you a few examples. Fragile languages is because a few months ago, a potential client of mine used this term, fragile languages, to describe some of my pieces, and I really liked it. I think that fits very well for the next project that I want to show you. So 15 November is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And I really like, when I can, to use my tools to talk about issues, even if there is not a commission or a client who asked me to do it. And so a few days before 25th of November, last year, I decided to talk about this subject. And I use this source, OECD, which is a very reliable source online. The data sets are free, are online, you can download it. And I decided to focus on the prevalence of violence, so the percentage of women percentage of violence in the lifetime, so the percentage of women who have experienced physical and or psychological violence from an intimate partner at a certain time in their life. And the data set showed this data for almost the world's country as a percentage. And this is one of those cases in which there are numbers that have, of course, people behind them, women behind them in this case. And something that I like to do to try to remind myself, and not only myself and the readers, about this presence is working on organic shapes. And this is the definition of organic, for instance, by Oxford Languages, relating to or derived from living matter. I think that working on organic visual elements is a way to remember the living behind those numbers. And this is one of the reasons I think that aesthetics it's communication. It's not only designing pretty things. Aesthetics means something, can mean something. And for this reason, in this case, I decided to design these soft shapes to represent the percentage of prevalence of violence. So one line represents 1%. It's pretty straightforward. And I visualize the data, so the percentage for the world's countries. And in this case, I didn't want to add any additional layer of information. I just wanted to visualize this data, and that's it. And then there wasn't a commission behind it, so I just posted online on my social media, Instagram and Twitter. And these are all the countries that I visualized. And these numbers are fragile numbers because of many reasons. First of all, because the fragile stories that stand behind them. But they are fragile numbers because the inaccuracy. Because a data such as the percentage of women who have experienced violence in their lifetime, it's not a number that you can count precisely, of course. You can get close, you can get very close, but you will leave behind stories, maybe hundreds of stories, maybe thousands of stories, and this is inevitable. But I don't think that this means that we don't have to use this data, because I think that sharing this data anyway, being aware of their of the fact that they are not inevitably the truth, but that they can be a tool to start exploring reality. It's a good thing because I think it's a way to start conversations, it's a way to talk about topics, it's a way to use numbers to explore issues and to communicate issues. And so I think that it's always very important to stress the fact that data can be not objective, data can be inaccurate, but it's important to recognize it and being aware of it. And communicate this subjectivity of data, because it's inevitable. And then another thing, making choices. Again, I want to show you another project of mine, because for me it's the best way to talk about these different topics and subjects. So 1 year ago, I worked for La Lettura, again, for Corriere della Sera, on a project on population density, and I had this data set showing the population for all the world's countries. And when I work on these kind of projects, I also have physical constraints to deal with because I'm working for a printed supplement, and so I cannot visualize all the data that I have because I don't have space in the page. It's a very simple problem, and so I always have to make choices and to make selections. For instance, in this case, I decided to visualize just the countries with a population of 10 millions, and then among them, I visualized just the top 40 countries for population density. So there is always the human intervention, but what is important, I think, it's declaring this intervention. When I have to write the text, in which I always have to write short text in which I describe what I'm visualizing, if there is a selection, I always have to declare it. I've selected these countries and the top 40 countries because it's important to be, it's a way to be intellectually honest with the readers, and I think it's very, very important, especially in my field. And so this is, for instance, the visual model that I applied. For each country, again, a very straightforward representation. One dot is one person, and so the number of dots represents the density. And then again, I overlay another layer of information, in this case, represented by a side circles that represents the total population by country. And then here you can go very, very fast. It's just to show the different steps of the project and of the process. And you can see that there is always an explanatory text, there is the legend, and there is, the words that explains what have been the selection behind this representation. And I want to conclude talking about another project, a very subjective one, that is the stories behind the line. So it's an old project of mine. I worked on it a few years ago, and a few years ago I decided that I wanted to use my job to talk about migration, and doing it, giving a shape to the journeys of asylum seekers arrived in Italy. And these are the 6 narrators who decided to share with me their stories. So there are 6 people hosted in a welcoming center in Vercelli. Vercelli is my hometown. And I asked at the time, at a volunteer in this welcoming center, if she knew someone who was interested in to participate at the project, because my idea was to tell these stories using very, very simple data, to talk about a complex topic that sometimes is subject to spectacularization by the media in a very clean and rational way. This was my goal. And so these are the 6 people who decided to participate with me to the project. And I met them, and with the help of Google Maps, we reconstructed their routes point by point. And then for each point, I asked them how many days they traveled to get there, which was the transportation, and how many days they stayed there before moving to the following place. So very simple and clear data. Plus, I've asked them to add, just when they wanted to, additional comments or memories or notes that they would have liked to add to their narrative. And to also add a qualitative element to this project. Of course, this data collection process was completely different from the ones I'm used to, because this time I decided not to download the dataset online, that it is a great way to communicate topics, but in this case, I just wanted to meet and talk with the people who live the topic, the migration topic every day. Because I think that data visualization can be not only as a tool to communicate to people, and this is essential to me, but also to give a voice to people who don't have any platforms. And so the final project is a website, an interactive storytelling piece. I designed it, and a very dear friend and colleague of mine, Alex Piacentini, helped me in designing it, because I don't code, and he does it. And so the project shows these stories, and for each person, for each narrator, there is this line, black line on a white background that shows the path. I wanted the first element for each one just to be this simple black line on a white background, and then interacting with it allows to see the data, the transportation data, the day spent traveling data, and also what is essential, the map behind those lines, and the red dots are the moments which they decided to share some more detailed fragments from their stories, and so clicking on them allows to read them. And yes, this is the map, because of course it's essential to see what is the map behind those lines, but I wanted it to be a second moment. I wanted at first to just show the lines. And so these data are very subjective. In this case, I didn't even choose the source. The source chose me, because they were the narrators that decided that they wanted to participate into the project. There are some missing data. There are some points in which they weren't able to remember how many days they took to go to that place, or the transportation. So there are missing data. These are very subjective data, but I declare it very clearly. There is a text in the website that explains that. And this is not a problem at all, because I think that they are very meaningful and precious anyway. There are many ways in which content, stories can be represented. And I think this is a very, it's a very extreme examples of how data can be subjective. But I think this is not a problem. What is important is always, I think, the intellectual honesty with the readers and with the people.
I really love this project. It's a small data, very small, tiny data. And we always talk about big data. And this is a tiny data project, very poetic, very true, very, really, I actually didn't know this project of yours. And I really loved it. So thanks. Valentina. Just to close our talk, I would like you to talk a bit. Since you have a landscape of the state of art of this not data artist in Italy, I would like to tell us the state of art of artists using data. Let's say somehow. So can you describe us and tell us a bit more about? I know this project.
Yeah, you know this project. Yeah. I brought a very little sampling, so a very, very tiny selection, because of course we don't have enough time to delve into the ocean of artistic projects that use data today. So I just chose 4 examples to show you, and as you will see, the approaches are different, both in terms of aesthetics, but also on a conceptual level. But there are some common aspects that also, and we will see which ones. But let's start from the first one, and the first one is a project by a duo of artists. Their names are Salvatore Iaconesi and Oriana Persico, and the title is Obiettivo. It was a project started in 2019. This project is part of a series called Data Poiesis, and this is the first artwork of the series. Before describing how this object works, I need to say that Salvatore and Oriana actually founded a cultural research center focused on artistic experimentation on data. This cultural center is called it's called HER. She loves data, so again, love and data, emotion and data, and they in their manifesto they claim to want to use data and computation to create cultural acceleration processes through art and design. And on this slide you find a statement wrote by them, and I think that it's very important to understand the approach, the general approach that they have to the relationship between art and technology, because they write data is a cultural artifact. In our contemporary culture, data is connected to the things people do, to their imagination, desires, and aspiration. For this, it is not a technical or technological concept anymore, but a cultural and psychological one. This is very important, and I think that a similar idea also was also stressed a minute ago by the other two hosts of this talk. So moving from these considerations, they built this sculpture called Obiettivo, which is they called this thing a data poietic object. It is actually a lamp, as you can see, and this lamp will not stop lightning until the world extreme poverty level falls below a certain level. And this level has been fixed. They fixed this level to a number, a precise number, which is 500,000 people in the world. So this sculpture collects data about poverty in the world from some reliable global sources that are available online, and process this data and monitor this data. And so this thing will be lightened up until this level falls below a certain point. And according to the artist, this event, we hope to see this thing, this light disappear one day, because that would mean that a new era for humanity has started, a era where we can see that there is more, maybe a little bit more justice, a little bit more fair distribution of resources. So this is one. Maybe we can go to the next slide. This is another image of this technological sculpture. As you can see also, these lights are in the shape of a human being lying. So there's also this reference to the presence of human being. And there is another part of the quote that is also important. This is again written by the artists themselves. It says, "Data poiesis brings into the world data poietic objects. They are new art and design objects using big amounts of data to make human beings able to experience complex phenomena." So again, this idea of trying to communicate complex realities through shapes, lights, sounds, and other and a lot of different mediums that artists can use. We can go to the next slide. The second project is also by, I don't know if I mentioned, I also selected Italian artists for this, because of course, if we look at the international landscape, it will be much more wide. And but this is another Italian artist. His name is Paolo Cirio, and this is one of probably the latest, the most recent project by him. And he works on the on studying the intersection between art and technology, but most importantly, he works on how technology affects society, especially in terms of rights and in terms of equality. And this is a great example of this approach. The project is called Capture, and it's a collection of images. They are the faces of a selection of police officers, French police officers to be more precise. The artist collected more than 1,000 public images of police officers. They were available online, and they were taken during protests in France. And then process these images with a facial recognition software. So in this case, at the center of the project, there is a discussion about artificial intelligence and more precisely about the use of facial recognition to control and identify people, so as a tool against citizens. And this is a quote by the artist that says, "I don't have anything against the police," because of course, as you can imagine, this project raised a lot of discussion and also, of course, was, caught the attention of the authorities. It was censored in France, and you can understand why. But of course, in the statement, the artist says, "I don't have anything against the police. I only want to demonstrate that facial recognition technology is above them. So police officers are just people, but they can use violent tools, and so the police needs to be accountable if they use these tools against citizens. At the moment, there is an asymmetry of power, where citizens are surveilled while the police is not accountable and they can hide. So I want to show that this asymmetry of power is not fair." So in this case, the use of technology, of facial recognition software, is used politically to show that there is a problem not in the technology itself, but in how we use the technology, in how we implement the technology, and in this case, in how people can be mistreated, how human rights can be neglected through the wrong way, use of these technologies. Next slide. This is the artist, and he also pasted some actual paper posters through the across the streets of Paris with the same images. So the project lives both online and offline. And the next one is a project by another Italian artist. His name is Emilio Vavarella. He uses technology in a very clever and imaginative way. And this project is one of a series. The series is called The Other Shape of Things, and this is number 1, Failed Objects. The project began in 2017, but is still ongoing. And it's very interesting because here the focus is on errors, on the errors of technology, on the moment when technology goes wrong. And he wrote, this is another quote, "One of the things I try to do in my work is to use the error as a detecting element. When you are faced with an extremely complex mechanism, one of the ways to realize how it works is to wait for the errors it makes. It makes the technological dynamics hidden in the technology, of course, more visible." And in this case, he uses the error to produce sculptures. So, as you can see in this artwork, there is technology, but there are also some very interesting physical objects that are actual sculptures. And the interesting thing is that he collected a huge number of objects that are considered failed. He collected these objects in 3D printing labs all over the world. And these objects were again scanned and again 3D printed by the artist, for 4 times in this case. So the first one is the initial failed objects that were then scanned and then printed again, and the second one scanned and printed, and so on. As you can see, every process of rescanning and reprinting produces new glitches new errors, new strange effects on the shape of the thing. So I think it's very interesting as a way to visualize errors of technology. Next slide. This is the same work with another statement by the same artist, Emilio Vavarella, and here he explains why he is interested in collecting and using data. He says, perhaps one of the reasons that drives me to collect data is the thirst for knowledge, the desire to reflect on the meaning of things, but it must be said that data are not things. Data are already the result of interpretative models. So as we mentioned many times this evening, data is not neutral in itself, but it's always the result of human actions and of models that are applied to numbers. So how data is collected, how it's organized, and how we visualize it, of course, influences in a very heavy way how we perceive the data and the meaning that we apply to it. The last one is a project by Elisa Giardina Papa. It's called Cleaning Emotional Data, and it's a very recent project from last year. And this is very interesting because it's a 3-channel video installation that addresses the problem of the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. This is a very interesting topic to explore. And specifically, the project is focused on the existence of a large infrastructure of workers who manually clean data, who work together with machines to clean data, to produce data that are then used by artificial intelligence software to train these systems. So for producing this project, Elisa Giardina Papa actually worked in a lot of companies that are called human-in-the-loop companies. These companies actually use workers, and most of the times they are underpaid workers that are crowdsourced all over the world. And these workers are assigned a lot of different works, different tasks. For example, they are asked to catalog images, to annotate facial expression, to sometimes also to record their own facial expression, to categorize images and emotional expressions. So this is, I think that this is a very interesting project about the sometimes hidden relationship between the human factor and the automatic factor in technology. And Elisa Giardina Papa writes a number of AI systems which supposedly recognize and simulate human affects, base their algorithms on flawed understandings of emotion. So on an idealized, universal idea of emotion, which most of the times, does not really mirror the way we actually express emotion. So this is a very, I think, important factor. Yeah, so this was the last one, and as you can see, the approaches are very different, but as I was saying in the first, answering your first question, there is a common attitude to be critical, to try to investigate, to go deeper inside the less visible levels of technology and the way in which these technologies interact with our daily lives.
Thank you, Valentina. There was a wonderful landscape of Italian artists working with data and working with data. And I think we're running out of time with this garden, so I would like to have back Luca, if he's still with us, just to say goodbye to Luca as well. And so I would like to thank you, Federica Fragapane, Valentina Tanni, and Luca Martinelli that is coming back. And thank you to all of you that were on streaming with Ars Elettronica, and hope to see you next year again in the Ars Elettronica Garden in Bologna. Thank you.
Thank you.